Hey everybody! Welcome to the Chronicles of Yarnia, the podcast from Montclair's local yarn store. My name's Amanda, and today we're having a exciting live. It is the last of a continuing series all about Flax Light by Tin Can Knits. So we've been doing this for 5 weeks. So if this is your first time tuning in, what we've done over the past 5 weeks is basically I started the Flax Light, which is a sweater pattern by Tin Can Knits. I hadn't prepped or read the pattern before, so was reading it just the same time as you guys. Had my yarn ready and my needles and cast on live way back at the beginning of November. And so each week I've done a different section of the sweater. The first week I did the cast on and the neckline ribbing. The second week I placed the raglan stitch markers and started the raglan increases for the yoke. The third week I separated for the sleeves, right? Put those sleeve stitches on waist yarn and then started knitting the body. That was the week before Thanksgiving. Once you start knitting the body, it's just stockinette in the round for quite a ways. So the second half of that podcast, or that episode right before Thanksgiving, episode 3, we talked a lot about our Thanksgiving recipes as well. And then last week, I went back and started the sleeves. So picked up the stitches that I had on. Well, actually, I started the bottom ribbing, right? Yes, I started the bottom ribbing and got that started. And then I also started the sleeves. So put these stitches that I had on hold back on the needles and then picked up some stitches under the arms and started knitting those sleeves down. Now, if those of you that remember, my plan was to start the decreases on the sleeves. But once we started reading the pattern together, realized that those sleeves are knit straight for quite a ways, like 7.5 inches, which is more than I can knit in an hour. So, which is how much time we have. So, change of plans. I ended up finishing the straight part of the sleeves last week. Well, one whole sleeve. Just have to bind that off. But then we're going to pick up as if I knit that whole sleeve. So first, let's talk about, I'll show you where I am. Hey, everybody coming in. Good to see you. Hey, from Maine. I have a fun blueberry picking story from Maine. Abby, who's now 10, when she was 3, her sisters used to go to New England Music Festival, which is just just north of Augusta. And anyway, we picked blueberries. She ate way more than she put in her bucket. And then didn't feel so well on the ride back. But that's what sticks in her head about Maine is that and going to the ocean in New York. But anyway, back to Flax Light. So here we are. Look at, whoops, that was a size 5 needle. So the yoke is all done. The body's done. And look at these. I have 2 sleeves. This sleeve is almost done. We just have to bind off. But this one, I got all the way to where the decreases start. So that's what we're going to start with tonight. The bottom is all bound off. This is finished. So, oh, that's where I put my stitch markers. I was so prepared. I re-prepared again today because I couldn't figure out where I had put my stitch markers. I took my project out of my bag. It's like, where did I put those? I put them where I couldn't miss them, but then I missed them. Okay, so we're using these stitch markers today. I'll show you how. But I used just a regular bind off on this one. And I'll show you how I did that. That's why I left this sleeve unfinished, because I'm going to do the same bind off on this sleeve. So, also first, some cute pictures of Charlie because he tried on his sweater. I wanted to make sure that the length was good, like down to here was good, that it fit him nicely. So I tried it on him and he was very amused that he was trying it on, still attached to a ball of yarn and needles in his sleeves. But the main point of this was to check that the body was long enough and that the sleeves were coming to the right point. So he was pretty happy with it. He's so silly. And it fits him well with room to grow, which was the goal. Okay, so first thing we're going to do today, let's look where we are in our pattern. So we are looking at the Flax Light pattern by Tin Can Knits. And we have done so much of this pattern. This page is the intro page. This is the size note. Finally, I remember what size we're looking at. You can see under the size note, we're making the size 4 to 6 years, which is the 1, 2, 3, 4th size inside that parentheses. So every time we get to a parentheses, we're going to look for the not bold numbers, the 4th one, and that's the size that corresponds to the 4 to 6 year size. Okay, we finished all this. We cast on for the yoke. We did our ribbing, option 1. Skipped option 2 because we didn't do that. Then we did all options. Continued on. Established our garter stitch sleeve panel and knit the yoke. Then we separated. We did not feel adventurous. This gray box at the top, that's adding short rows, which is if I was knitting an adult sweater, I would put the short rows in. It raises the back neck a little bit. And I'll show you what that means. But in a kid's sweater, it doesn't make that much difference. And what that means, if the front is identical to the back, that means they can wear it front ways or back ways, and it doesn't matter, which is lovely with a kid. Then we separated for body and sleeves. Knit the whole body. At the bottom here, all options changed to the smaller needle, knit the ribbing, and bound off. Started our sleeves. Look how much we've done. Oh my goodness. We put our stitches back on the needle, cast on under the underarms, and now we're on this first 1, 2, 3. If you include the note is 3, 4, 5. That 5th paragraph says work 1, 2, 3, 4, 7.5 inches even, maintaining the garter panel and knitting all the other stitches. So in other words, just knit, knit, knit until you get to the garter and then every other row purl. Okay, that's where we are. Then it says decrease round, knit 1, knit 2 together, then, well, the instruction here must say what I'm looking for is this instruction says knit to 3 stitches before the beginning of round marker. But if it was a garter panel row where you were supposed to purl, then you would purl those stitches for the garter panel, not just knit all the way around, because we're still maintaining that garter panel even in a decreased round. So we're going to have a decreased round, knit to 3 stitches before the beginning of round marker, and then slip, slip, knit the last stitch, and we've decreased 2 stitches. So at the knit 2 together, 2 stitches become 1, and the slip, slip, knit, 2 stitches become 1. And both of those make the decrease point towards the bottom of the sleeve. I'll show you what that means. Then it says work 6 rounds even. So in other words, just knit 6 rows without doing anything. No decreases. And then work these 7 rows. So the decrease plus the 6 additional rows. A total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 3 times. A total of 3 times. That means this first time that we did it was time number 1, and we do it 2 more times for a total of 3 times. All right, so that is our first part of tonight. Okay, I dropped my size 5. Here we go. Okay, so here I am just at the same place that I started decreasing on the other sleeve. Now, you can see on this other sleeve, I knit, and then I measured from this white which was our, this was where we put our stitches on hold, right? We put our stitches on hold here, back at when we put our sleeve markers in, or we put our sleeves on hold. We picked up those stitches again, but I didn't take out this white yarn because I said, oh, that's going to be super easy to measure from there, because it's a bright white line in my sweater. So then I take my ruler. Actually, I have this is what I actually use, my wrist ruler. I take my ruler and I measure from the line. This is what I do while I'm knitting. And when I get to 7.5 inches here, when I get to 7.5 inches, that's when I start to decrease. Okay. What actually happened was I was sitting with the kids and watching Christmas movies, and I went to 8 inches before I started decreasing. So that's fine. And it turns out fine. And if it's a little long, we'll cuff the green part up and he can wear it a little bit longer and the sleeve will be a smidge longer. I'm fine with that. So, but that means I have to do exactly the same thing on the other side. So what I did when I was knitting this around and around and around and around, right, was I counted as an estimate, because it's easy to count. I counted these garter ridges, right? So it's easy to count these garter ridges and see I had 32 before the stitch marker for my decreases. And then on the other side, I knit until I had 31. Sometimes it's hard to tell if especially since your decrease is on the inside of the sleeve and the garter panel is on the outside, which one exactly lines up with your first decrease row. So that's the point where I actually went back up to this white line and counted every row down to where I had, and then I found out I had 64 rows to 8 inches. So I am exactly at the point where I decreased. So this is the same, whether it's the first time you do it or the last time. We're going to first knit 1, slips, and then knit 2 together. So starting at the beginning of the round, which is at the underarm, we're going to knit 1 and then knit 2 together. And how we knit 2 together, right? We put our right needle under not just 1 stitch, right? To knit 1 stitch, you just put your right needle through 1 stitch, knit 2 together. We put it through 2 stitches at the same time, right? And then just knit normally. Wrap, pull it out, take both stitches off the needle. So now those 2 stitches on the last row have become 1 stitch on this row. 1 stitch decreased. Okay, continue around the row to the last 3 stitches. I'm really proud of myself on this because I did not mess up the garter 1 time, which is sort of shocking. I usually would mess up the garter. And what I mean by that is not pay attention and knit a row that had where I had knit the prior row and end up with like a longer section between purl bumps or purl ridges. I usually do something like that on at least each sleeve, especially when I'm watching TV, but I didn't this time. Woohoo! I think it's because I'm like trying to make this really quality for you guys. Maybe my brain is focusing on doing the right thing a little bit more. Okay. So that was our garter panel. We were on a purl row on the garter, so I didn't knit all the way around. I just purled when I got to the garter, right? Green is for garter. That's those stitch markers tell us where the garter panel is. I'm really glad I put those in. I don't see how I would have kept up with exactly the right stitch that the garter panel begins and ends if I didn't have those stitch markers on there. Okay, now where are we? Okay, 4. Now there's 3 stitches left. 1, 2, 3. Now I'm going to slip, and that means just move it from one needle to another. Slip, I slip as if to knit. And then I put my left needle through both of those stitches and I knit through the back loop. Like that. I'll show you again. Although now I've got to rearrange stitches a little bit because they're seated the wrong way. Okay. Slip, that means move it from one needle to the other, move from one needle to the other, stick this first needle back through both of those stitches, wrap around your working needle, and pull them off. Ta-da! Now, the next row I'm going to knit even, and then we'll take a look at those stitches. It's very hard to see those decreases when the row that you just knit is right on your needle, so it's easier to see them if you've done one more row. So we're going to do one more row. And remember, this is number 1 of 6 that we're just going all the way around. Blah, 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 blah. After you're used to knitting the body of the sweater around, it's so shocking how fast, how much faster the sleeves go because there's such a smaller circumference. Today is my vlogmas day. So I've been not only getting ready for this YouTube today, I've also been recording all sorts of things that have been going on at home today for vlogmas. So are you guys watching vlogmas? Are you guys watching other vlogmases? I was watching Skeindier's vlogmases last night, and some of Nitty Natty's while I finished 64 rows. Okay. All right, here we go. So now we can see this a little bit better. And I'm going to get up close on this one. So this is the slip knit. You can see it right here. Boop, boop, boop. This is the slip knit where 2 stitches become 1. Right? This stitch here is leaning towards the underarm of our sweater. Ta-da-da. That's the slip knit. This is the 2 stitches. It becomes 1. On this that becomes 1, I'm going to put a stitch marker. That is my loop to mark. Because I'm going to count 6 rows from that row to figure out when I'm going to decrease again. Okay, now let's look at the other side. on this side, this is our slip slip knit. We're 2 stitches, right? Where these 2 columns of stitches became 1 stitch here. These 2 became 1 stitch here. Let me see. Let me do that again. These 2, this column and this column became 1 stitch here. That was our slip slip knit. Okay. And in this one, the right stitch is over the left stitch as you look at it, right? So it's pointing again towards the underarm, the beginning of the round. So that's the goal, right? You want your decreases to point, well, in this pattern, they want them to point towards the beginning of the round, towards that underarm, almost as if there was a little seam there. Let me show you what that looks like on the other sleeve. Right here, I've done 3 decreases. Let me get these stitch markers going this way. Here, here, and here. And you can see how they look mirrored. If we did 2 knit 2 togethers in a round, which isn't a crisis, if you like knit 2 togethers and slip slip knit is really tricking you up, like this is a detail, so that you're knitting, it's fine. Literally no one will ever notice, especially since it's under the arm. But instead of both pointing towards the center here, they would both point in the same direction, right? Which doesn't look as symmetrical. So because knitters are picky, we want our stitches to be symmetrical. That's why we do the knit 2 together at the beginning and the slip slip knit at the end of the row. So that's what I did. Now I'm going to continue on even. So I've knit 1 round even. Yay. I'll do 2. Let's see if I can get to 6 even. I might. It's possible. So the other things I'm going to work on tonight are finishing that other sleeve and weaving in some ends. This is a purl ridge. It is nobody's birthday on Yarnia Vlogmas today, which I feel like is a minority of days since the beginning of this Vlogmas. We've had 5 days so far and for 3 birthdays. Yeah, it has been. So now day 6 will pull that even. We'll have half days. Half the Vlogmas days will be birthdays after tonight. I think we have 2 more birthdays for the rest of December. So it's a popular month. Yeah, my brain gets nerdy and numbery. I always think of patterns anytime there are numbers around. Or words and letters, really, honestly. I'm a very pattern-focused person. Maybe that's why, like, lace charts are very appealing. I love lace charts. Ah, we did miss Emma's. Wow. So Teddy's is the first. Oh my goodness. I forget whose I edited when. Seisha. Oh, hers is the fourth, the same as Seisha, right? Seisha's was the fourth and Jen's was the fifth. Ah, first birthday. That's so fun though. Did they do anything big? I've had everything from like big first birthdays, which that was Catherine's. And she fell asleep, literally fell asleep face first in her cake. It was a little overwhelming for the baby, but the grown-ups loved it. Well, you guys all saw Teddy's first birthday last year. It was just a home birthday, and Knit Night sang happy birthday to him, which was perfect, and he loved it. I was telling my my babysitter that like my rule of thumb, at least for like toddlers and preschoolers, is the number of kids at a birthday party should equal the age of a child. Right? So Teddy was 2 this year. He had 2 little friends at his birthday party, and that's enough. Right? Next year he'll be 3. So he'll yeah, he can have 3 little friends at his birthday party. Ah, yeah, those colds are going around. I mean, I'm sure my cough is much better this week. I feel like I've been recovering every Tuesday too with you guys since that Tuesday before Thanksgiving. I got hit hard by a kid cold, but now I'm mostly recovered. So just have a little bit of a cough that mostly doesn't bother me because I drink a ton of tea. But it gets annoying sometimes. Yeah, on the kids' birthday parties, I mentioned that rule, and then Eric, my 8-year-old, was like, "But there's more than 8 people in my class. What am I going to do?" I was like, "Okay, it doesn't apply to like 9-year-olds. That you've outgrown the rule." He was panicked for a minute there. He's gonna have to be exclusive in his birthday party. Who gets an invite? Okay, let's see how many rows we've done. Okay. So this stitch that I marked here with a V, I marked this V with a stitch marker, right? We're going to count the V's that are stacked on top of it. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 1 on the needle. So that's 5. Okay, so I do one more. These addies have one sharper end and one duller end, which is great because you use the sharper end as your working needle and the duller end over here. So when you're like poking it with your finger, if you do that, right, you don't make a hole in your finger like you can with some needles. But you still get the benefit of like working with a sharpish needle. I'd say they're slightly, if you know chow goose, they're slightly less sharp than chow goose, but not in a bad way. I find them pretty interchangeable. I do like my addies for socks though. What am I doing? This is a garter. Yes, did it right. Did it right. Yay. Yeah, if Jean has this cold that Ollie had and that I had, definitely tell him to stay away and keep his mask on. Because I know I was talking to Jen and I felt the same way, but Ollie said that like this cold was worse than what at least our experiences were for COVID. Oh, I got very lucky with my COVID experience. Very lucky. Not so lucky with this cold experience. You never know how it's going to be. Okay. Now let's count again, just because count twice, cut once. I'm not cutting, but you know what I mean. Okay, this is the V with a stitch marker on it. And now we're going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That sixth one is on the needle. So that means we've done 6 rows even, right? This is the decrease one, and then there's 6 above it that were straight. And so now we have another decrease round. So our decrease is knit 1, knit 2 together, knit to the last 3 stitches, minding the garter panel. Yay. This time on the garter panel, it's knit all the way across. That makes sense, because the last decrease round we purled, and then that's in series of 7. 7 is odd. So this one should be knit, and it is. Yay. I definitely, when I'm doing several decreases in the sweater, sometimes I forget to do the second decrease, the slip slip knit one, because I get distracted and I'm just knitting even. But that's okay. I just throw it in the next round. It's not a crisis. Okay, to my last 3 stitches, I'm going to slip, slip, and then knit those together and knit 1. I used to not slip 2 stitches. I used to slip the first one and then like knit the 2 together. But I realized over time that like slipping both of them really does make it lay flatter and look nicer. It's slight, but like slipping 2 stitches versus 1 really doesn't take that much more time. It's silly not to do it. Okay, I'm going to knit 1 more round so then I can place my stitch marker on my decrease. I also feel like these Tuesdays have been disproportionately rainy. I feel like it's been rainy when I've come here to knit with you guys, like more often than not. Maybe that's just a function of like November is rainy because, well, it's better than it being snowy, I guess. Thank goodness. Thank goodness for rain. Yay. And I have a new raincoat. Well, new-ish. I got it this summer. Or I guess spring, when I went to Block Island on our North Light Fibers knitting retreat. I was walking in the main town and they had a raincoat on sale. Yay. And it was pink pearlescent, which is perfect. Yay. So I've been comfortable in the rain in my pink pearl pink and raincoat, which very much reminds me of my phone in the mid 2000s. I had like a BlackBerry Pearl and it was pink, and it was, I think, the color of my raincoat. So I have a theme. Okay, I decreased again. I'm going to be counting from this decrease. So I'm going to mark it with a stitch marker here. Oh, and I forgot to mention, right? Like these stitch markers that I used on my needle, I like using the round ones. When it's a stitch marker that's counting stitches on my needle. So you can see like this stitch marker is going around my needle. I pass it from needle to needle, right? When I get to it in my work, and they're a little bit thicker, they're bright, like I can really see where they are. But obviously a solid stitch marker doesn't work when I need to place it on a stitch in my fabric and I need it to stay there until the work is done, and then I want to take it out, right? So for that, I'm using the Coconut's opening stitch markers, right? Which come in the same colors. So if you like the rainbow chromatic part, then you can do that. Also with these, but right, they're just a different tool for a similar but not exactly the same use. So okay, I've done 2 of my 3 decreases. Look at this. So we can actually see how close to being done on this sleeve I am. Right, here we go. I just line up the 2 waist yarns that held the sleeves, and then they line up. You can see like I only have, whoa, I'm looking at it. I'm not showing you guys. Oh my goodness. There we go. Ah, so I'm this far. So I've only got like another, I don't know, 1.5 inches maybe. And then the ribbing, and I'm done with the sleeve too. But in the interest of moving things along for you guys, I'm going to set that aside and work on this bind off for the other sleeve. Now, to do the bind off on the other sleeve, or the ribbing on the other sleeve, you'll remember here when I got to the ribbing, what did I do? First of all, I switched to smaller needles, which I did again. And I also did exactly what I did on the neck, and it took me like 3 rounds to take out all of my larger needles because I have the memory of a goldfish and can't remember that I should swap needles to the smaller size. Anyway, it got there eventually. And then so the first round, I knit every stitch in the new color, in the green, right? And then on the second row, I started the knit 1, purl 1. And you'll see what that does. It's on the bottom rib too, and you can see it a little bit better, is that there's no blue purl bumps. The first purl bump between the ribbing is green, right? Which again, like the slip, slip, knit, both of those stitches pointing towards the middle and being symmetrical, it's a small detail. If the first purl bump was blue, most people, literally nobody's ever going to notice. But you might when you put it on, and then you'd wonder like, well, why is that purl bump blue? Why weren't they all green? I was knitting with green. The reason is because the purl bump is the color of the last row, and that's why we knit 1 round all the way around. Okay, but now this sleeve has been finished, and I'm going to bind off. So I didn't leave this attached to the yarn, to the ball of yarn, which at this point is becoming quite floppy. You can see, right? It's like I have a material amount of blue left, which I'm sort of surprised, but I'm running quite low on the green. See, you can see that's all the green that I have to do the sleeves on the other side. So anyway, I didn't feel like having this attached, so I just like took off a good length of yarn and tied it off here so that it would be neat and out of the way while I worked on the other sleeve. Okay. And also, I thought of this today. I used ChiaoGoo circular needles, right, for the body of the sweater and the bottom ribbing. ChiaoGoo size 5 and a size 2 as called for in the pattern. A US 2. An Addy US 2 is 3 millimeters. ChiaoGoo and almost every other brand US 2 is 2.75 millimeters. So this is actually 1/4 millimeter bigger than the ChiaoGoos. So my gauge on my wrist cuffs is going to be slightly, and I started this on so basically the neckband and the wrist cuffs are going to be slightly looser gauge than the bottom band because I'm knitting with a slightly larger needle. And I forgot about that. I remember that all the time with Addy 1s. An Addy 1 is 2.5 millimeters versus ChiaoGoo 1 or, you know, a Luca 1. Those are all 2.25 millimeters. So, yeah, just something to keep in mind. The reason that occurred to me is because, well, if you watch my vlogmas, probably I would advise tomorrow because it's going to be really late tonight that this actually gets out. The vlogmas gets out for tonight. But I have a new project that uses a 3 millimeter needle, and I got some Addy flip sticks. And then I started thinking, oh, it would be really convenient to have 2 sets of needles to do this project. And I said, oh, it's on my flax. Oh, it's on my flax. Oh, that's a 3 millimeter needle on my flax. So that was my train of thought. Anyway, okay. I'm at the beginning of this round that I'm going to bind off. So this is knit 1, purl 1 rib. I'm going to knit the first stitch and purl the second stitch. Okay. Then I'm just going to lift that first stitch over the second stitch on my right needle, so only 1 stitch remains. This is a standard bind off. I'm going to knit the next stitch because it's a column of knits. Then pass the second stitch on my left needle, right needle, over the first stitch, so only 1 stitch remains. The next stitch is a column of purls, so I'm going to purl that stitch, right? And then lift the second stitch over the first stitch on the right needle, so then only 1 stitch remains. Yay! And I'm going to keep doing that all the way around. If it's a knit stitch, if it's a column of knits, I'm going to knit it. If it's a column of purls, I'm going to purl it. So, and I'm not going to tug on these stitches too tightly. I want a flexible edge. There are, if you pull tightly on your bind off, you might find that your bind off isn't flexible, right? Like it's not elastic enough to like get over little dudes or your own like hand before it gets to your wrist. So if that happens, you can pull out your bind off and try a stretchier bind off. Let me show you a stretchier bind off. So it would start the same way. You knit 1 and purl 1, or if you're in the middle of the work, then you have 1 stitch on your right needle. You're going to have a second stitch on your then you're going to put a second stitch on. I have a column of knits. Then I'm going to put my needle, my left needle, through both of those stitches. Look at this. So I'm going to put my left needle through both of those stitches like this, right? So now my right needle's at the back And then I'm going to wrap the yarn and knit through the back loop. Right? So that actually, instead of passing that stitch over, I knit them together through the back loop. If I'm doing a purl, then I'd purl it, stick my right needle through the back of both stitches, which can be tricky sometimes. Come here. It's trickier with these. For this, I would prefer chagu just because both tips are sharp. And if you're using the duller tip to try to get back in those right side needles, it can be tricky. And then, well, anyway, so now I have my needle. I put my left needle to the back of the 2 stitches on the right needle, and now I'm going to purl 2 together like that. So that would be my purl stitch for that bind off. I'm not going to do that though. That is called Jenny's surprisingly stretchy bind off, because it is surprisingly stretchy. You add in what you're basically doing is you're adding more yarn, right, in the bind off. That yarn is traveling further because it's not only doing the 2 knits or the knit stitch and the purl stitch, but then it's doing another knit stitch in between, and that gives it more flex, right? The longer that strand is that's in the bind off, the more flexible it'll be. Let's see. I think I was here. I'm passing the stitch over. With me, my habit is to bind off pretty loosely, ironically, because my knitting is not particularly loose, but my bind offs do have quite a bit of, looseness in them. And when I do a Jenny's surprisingly stretchy bind off, it flares. That means I have more fabric in my bind off than I have on the row before, right? And that extra fabric has to go somewhere, and so it flares, right? So you just gotta try different, and I'll link a tutorial to Jenny's surprisingly stretchy bind off down below once this posts. Kathleen, if you can remind me to do that, that would be great. So yeah, you can take a look at that. If you find that your bind off tends to be a little tight, you might use that. Also, another thing that I've done is a hybrid of the two. So sometimes I'll, like, say on the purls, I'll just purl and pass one over. And then on the knits, I'll do the knit and then knit 2 together through the back loop, right? So I'll do Jenny's surprisingly stretchy bind off on the knits only. And on the purls, I'll just do the regular pass over. And guess what? That makes it halfway in between. It's a little more flexible than the it's a little more flexible than a standard bind off, but not as loose as as loose and stretchy as Jenny's surprisingly stretchy bind off, which sometimes is exactly what you need. So yeah, you can play with that too. If you're doing, you could do 2 out of every 3 stitches as Jenny's surprisingly stretchy bind off. Okay, I finished the first needle. So now the needle that has one, and so now there's no more stitches on this needle. They're all gone. I'm going to put it down. Now there's 1 stitch left on this needle. That's become, that's going to become my working needle to finish this bind off. If I was doing this sweater, if I was making this to be judged somewhere, if I was making this for the state fair, I would probably, and maybe if I was doing it for myself, in a very nice yarn, right? Like, say the Water Street DK, which is, you know, a 40% cashmere, 60% Falkland Islands wool. It's like a delicious yarn. Or, you know, like the Woolfolk Tauve DK here, or something, you know, like a really special yarn. I might do a sewn bind off, right? Which mirrors a tubular cast on, or looks similar to a tubular cast on. And that is, that's like where the rows of knits just like curl over the edge, right? And then they just, there, it doesn't, it looks like it just continues on the other side of the fabric. So, yeah, sort of like, well, I feel like, no, that's not a very good example of it. I'm wearing a commercial sweater today, and often that's how commercial sweaters are ended. Aha! Jen did a sewn bind off on this little wristlet. You see how on this one, this is a sewn bind off. So you see how the this row, this column of knits just curves over the edge and continues on the back. Yeah, so that's there's a technique to doing that, which is very similar to Kitchener stitch. You're basically Kitchenering your knits on the front to the purls on the back. And it makes that very nice bind off, which is also stretchy but doesn't flare. So that is an excellent option if you really want a very finished look. It takes time, a lot more time than a standard bind off or a Jenny's Surprisingly Stretchy. And I'm knitting for a 4-year-old who is not going to stay still long enough for somebody to notice what kind of bind off is on the sleeves. So I'm not choosing to do that on this particular sweater. I do often do a sewn bind off for sleeves because they're pretty small. There's not that many stitches. And people tend to see your sleeves, right? Like you'll have them on a table or a desk or something, and people will see your sleeves. And I often would cast on using a tubular cast on because people are looking at your face when they talk to you, right? And like, this is right there. But often, even if I do a tubular, oh man, don't tell me I'm gonna run out of yarn here. Oh no. We'll see. Maybe I won't. Even if I do a tubular cast on and a sewn bind off on the sleeves, I will do a standard bind off on the bottom of my sweater because that's my brand of lazy. I'm just not doing, nobody should be looking at the bind off on the bottom of my sweater. I am, by the way, probably binding these off a little more tightly just so I don't completely run out of yarn. I estimated slightly small for the amount of yarn needed to bind off here, but we made it. We made it. We made it. Okay, so this last stitch, I'm going to pull the end through and end off. So now I have this itty bitty end that I need to weave in. Yep, see, that is plenty of stretch for a 4-year-old hand. That's probably plenty of stretch for my hand. Let's see, experiment. Yes, my hand can go through this. So I don't need to have a stretchier bind off. Like I said, I do tend to bind off loosely. Okay, so now I'm going to weave in this end, and I love weaving in on 1 by 1 because you have these ribs to really weave in, to help you weave in your end. So There we go. Come on. All right. The first thing I'm going to do, right? I have the beginning of where I started binding off here, and I have the end of where I bound off here. And the two, there's like a, do you see how like there's a little stair step right here between the two? So what I do first is I go under the first stitch of my bind off and sort of create one more top stitch, and then back under this last stitch of my bind off. And it like creates, you see the chain of the bind off on the edge of these stitches? It like creates one more stitch in that chain that just makes it look more complete, right? Like, so you can't tell where the bind off started. Then I'm going to weave in these ends. So you can see I've got my column of knits here. I'm just going to pick up one of each of these knits here. That's probably enough given this very short little piece of yarn. And pull it in like that. Then, and this is a tip, if you do end up with a short piece of yarn, you can actually thread your needle through first. So I'm going to go ahead and put my needle through 3, 4. And I'm going to stop on the next to last stitch, so I don't have like a little frayed tail hanging out once I snip this piece of yarn. And so now I can thread my yarn through my needle, and it gives me a couple of extra inches to not to play with when I'm weaving in my ends. So ta-da, yay, I made it. Well, I guess I did conserve that green yarn for the second sleeve. Yeah, and then I just trim close to the last stitch. There we go. So yay, one finished little sleeve. Look at that. One finished sleeve. That's the only end I've woven in so far. Let's see, we've got 3 minutes. Let me weave in one more. I'm going to weave in this one under the underarms, because you can see, right, I have a little bit of a gap here from where I started. And I think this is more art than science, frankly. But I use the concept of a mattress stitch to help me close up this hole now. I'm going to put my hand under so I don't sew the front of my garment to the back of my garment. Okay, so I'm going to pick up 2 bars, right? Like this gap is between 2 columns of knit. So I'm going to pick up 2 bars here. Wow. Came off my needle. Two bars here. 2 bars on the other side. Right? And that tightens up your hole. Ta-da! Yay! So then you can just feed your yarn to the other side and weave in your ends the way you normally would. But that's how I get rid of the holes under my underarms, which I think brings us to the end of this adventure. Now all that's left, because you've finished the body, finished a sleeve, woven in your ends, and you get a finished sweater. Yay! I've got a little bit more work to do, which I'm going to finish over the next couple of days. And then I'm going to block this sweater. So that means get it nice and wet, soak it, let the fibers settle out. And that'll help. I don't know if you noticed when I was doing this, you can see some of the columns, like the right leg of some of my stitches is more pronounced than the left leg, and that will work its way out in blocking, right? And wear and washing over the next several years. But yeah, that'll work itself out. And I will record a little blocking video for you, a little blocking vlog for you, as well as a little modeling video with Charlie on the playground wearing his Flax Light. So everybody can see little dude in the finished product. So thank you so much for hanging out with me over these past 5 weeks. It definitely has been motivation to finish this sweater that I needed to finish for Charlie. And I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have and hopefully picked up a tip or trick along the way. It's been awesome chatting with you all. I've really enjoyed this format and I look forward to doing it again sometime. Y'all have a great night. Bye.